Welcome back. As you progress through school, the amount of reading that you will need to do will increase dramatically. Your teachers will expect you to read, understand, make connections, and remember more and more material. At times, it'll feel overwhelming. Maybe it already does. But there is hope. In this topic, you will learn about active reading, what it is, and why it's important. You will learn how to read your class materials more efficiently and feel more confident when you're reading and studying. Have you ever been reading something sort of boring and you get to the end of the paragraph or the page and you suddenly realize that you have no idea what you've been reading about? It's just like your brain went on autopilot. Even though you were reading the words, you don't really have a clue what you just read. I call that zombie reading. You're completing the activity, but it might as well have been a zombie doing the reading because your brain was hardly involved at all. Zombie reading is a total waste of your time because your brain isn't going to remember anything. Instead, active reading is a process using a few quick steps to keep your brain from going into zombie mode. There are 4 simple questions you should answer when reading class material. These questions will help you to understand and remember the text you read. This process will save you loads of time when it comes to studying because you will understand and remember so much more. Let's take a closer look at each of these steps. Step 1 is to set a purpose for reading. In an earlier topic, we discussed how taking a road trip without a destination in mind is an easy way to get lost. The same is true for reading a textbook. You need to determine your purpose before you begin. To do this step, simply ask yourself, why am I reading this? Knowing your purpose is the first step when reading efficiently. Sitting down and simply reading through the assigned pages would be a major waste of your time. Setting a purpose for reading only takes a minute, but it'll save you hours in the long run because it helps you to organize your thoughts. To help you along with beginning to use active reading, there's an active reading preparation page in your printable resources packet. You can print a copy of this page for any material that you are required to read for class. Many students find it helpful to keep these in the notes section of their binders. Let's take a look at that page together. For this step, I've included a few suggestions to give you ideas about possible reasons that you might be reading a text. You can choose as many answers as you think apply. Perhaps you're reading this assignment to study for an exam or to get a general overview for class. Maybe you're rereading a passage that was particularly difficult to understand, or you're gathering research for a paper that you need to write. You may only be reading an assignment because the teacher assigned questions that you need to answer. Believe it or not, the reason you're reading something should affect the way you read. I'll explain more about that later. For now, just think about why you are reading it and check off the boxes that apply. Also, you don't have to use these suggestions, so feel free to add your own reason in the other box. Step 2 is assessing prior knowledge. That's a fancy way of saying think about what you already know about the topic. This step is similar to an athlete warming up before a workout. Athletes warm up to prepare their bodies for the task ahead. Assessing prior knowledge warms up or prepares your brain for reading and remembering complex material. It strengthens the connections in your brain and makes it easier for you to understand and remember material that you're reading. To do this step, you will answer the question, what do I already know about this? One way to do this is to make a small chart before you begin reading. You can divide a piece of notebook paper into 3 sections. Label one a K, one a W, and one L. There is already one made for you on the active reading page so that you can save time. In the K section, write down everything that you already know about this topic, or anything the topic reminds you of. You should use short phrases, not complete sentences. In the W section, jot down what you would like to know. Include any questions that you have regarding the topic. In the L section, write down a few phrases about what you expect to learn about in the reading. It doesn't matter if you're correct or not. The important part is that you're writing down a few guesses about what the reading will be about. Let's go over a quick example of how this would look in, say, a history class. If you were studying the Industrial Revolution, for example, you might say, well, I know the growth of factories and cities were a result of the time period, and I remember learning before about how it brought about the middle class in society and about how the invention of the steam engine played a role in it. For the want to know section, you might say, I don't remember how the middle class started. I also don't know where the Industrial Revolution started or what countries were involved. Finally, For the I think I will learn section, you could say, I'm probably going to learn about some of the famous people during this time period and the importance of some of the inventions. By doing this, you are actually changing the wiring in your brain. You're preparing a way for your brain to connect what you are about to read to the stuff that you already know. This works with math too. For instance, if you were learning about imaginary numbers, you might say, well, I know that imaginary numbers have something to do with square roots, and that they somehow involve the letter I. I want to know what being an imaginary number really means, and I think I will learn how the square root is involved and what the I stands for. Before we move on, I just want to restate how important this step is. It's essential for preparing your brain to read and remember new information. It should only take 5 minutes. I know it will be tempting for you to skip this step when you're reading. However, assessing prior knowledge will make it 10 times easier for you to understand, learn, and remember new material. The next step is to preview your reading. Previewing involves a quick glance at the main ideas in the text to get a big picture of the material. It is not actually reading the main body of the text. Previewing your reading is like watching the coming attractions for movies. Movie previews introduce the main characters and general plot. Previewing your reading gives you an idea of the overall organization and the major ideas being presented. To do this, glance through the text, looking at the major organization of the reading. This prepares your brain to pay attention to the most important concepts. So what sort of things should you look for when you're previewing the reading? Pay attention to chapter titles and subtitles. Sentences with bold, italicized, or highlighted words. You should do a quick read of these sentences only. Headings and subheadings with chapters, and any pictures that are included in the text. Also, if you're lucky enough that your book includes a main idea or big idea summary section, read it as part of your preview. This is like a free giveaway of important things that you need to understand. Just like the other images, check out any charts, diagrams, tables, and captions. And again, if there are any summary sections or questions at the end of the chapter, read these first as a part of the preview, because they're basically pointing out what the author felt was the most important things in the reading. So you'll want to be looking for them as you read and keeping them fresh in your mind. So far, we've covered how to preview a textbook. But when you're reading for an English class, you may be reading a fiction novel. In this case, when you do your preview, read the introduction or prologue section if there is one. Then check out the sections or chapter headings. Some books may include vocabulary you should know or even questions at the end of the book. For example, occasionally books have suggested questions for book clubs. These will all give you a preview for the book you are going to read, especially if it's going to be a challenging one. The last step is actually to read the text using either scanning or intensive reading. These two reading techniques are very different and useful in different situations. The technique that you decide to use will depend on the purpose for reading that you determined in Active Reading Step 1, Set a Purpose. Scanning is more useful if you're reading for answering specific questions or reviewing information. Intensive reading involves note-taking and more careful reading. We'll go over how to take notes in another topic because there are specific strategies to help you with that. One final note, many students who own their own textbooks choose to highlight or mark up their textbook as they read. However, recent research indicates that unless you are also taking notes, highlighting is ineffective and can actually hurt your ability to remember information. If you find this technique helpful for you, by all means go ahead. However, the notes that you take on paper would be far more useful than notes in a textbook. Additionally, highlighting or underlining often reduces the value of a textbook if you're able to sell it back when the year is over. If you do choose to write and highlight in your textbook, there are a few best practices I recommend. Underline rather than highlight. Most people use their highlighters too much and end up defeating their entire purpose. Underline only the important words, not the whole sentence. Try to write your own thoughts and questions in phrases in the margins. Personalizing your textbook helps you to remember the information better. Last, take notes on paper. If you decide to mark up your textbook, you still need to take notes on lined paper. Note-taking is all about engaging the brain, not just reading and recording information. This is an example of what I call going highlighter happy. This student has highlighted so much information that it has become pointless. When they go back to look at this page again later, they basically have to reread everything all over. Only highlight the most important information on a page and try to keep it to only a few words or phrases rather than whole sentences. The topics on taking notes will help you to identify which information is the most important. As a quick review, in this topic, you learned that active reading is a simple activity that takes less than 5 minutes and helps you to understand and remember more of the text that you read. It's like warming up your brain, and it builds connections in the brain, which will save you a ton of time when you're studying. You just have to ask yourself, why am I reading this? What do I already know? How is the author presenting the information? And which information should I write down? Now that you know how, take a few minutes to practice active reading with one of your books. You can use the active reading page in the printable resources packet or make your own this week.